I think we all saw today, and we all have known over the past year, that our industry has changed and our landscaping is changing. But what I'd like to talk a little more about today is maybe some non-traditional approaches as well. If you look at our global landscape, you can see that we have 285 million people that are visually impaired, and about 80% of that visual impairment can be prevented or cured. We've got obviously some needs and opportunities, but providing the quality vision to these people is a challenging issue for all of us. We have some serious eye diseases, challenge we must meet, aging population, and obviously things like diabetes that we heard about earlier, challenging not just the ophthalmic arena. We had a lot of innovation, which is great. This is what we all love about, and the previous panel showed the energy behind all of that. So no shortage on innovation. And then, of course, no shortage on large companies taking advantage and large companies working together. We obviously now know Johnson & Johnson and AMO together, and we've got other large companies moving forward. You then have new players coming in. You've got Glaukos elevating, Tommy doing a great job with Chris there, and Santan, and of course we heard more from Bob Dempsey and hear more from Flemming today about Shire. And then you've got great technologies that we heard today, from AccuFocus to Tier Lab to RVO, Sun Pharmaceutical, interesting discussion earlier as we go forward. If you looked at the investment landscape, Joe and a couple other people were talking about it. We all see the investments. We know we talk about some challenges. Is it in device? Is it in pharma, biopharma? But we do know that there are investments in this area. But the science is changing too. Think about the categories that we just maybe 4 or 5 years ago would never even thought about that are now really impacting how we go forward. But this is the one that I found the most interesting and the most challenging, is because these new forces of changes. I looked this up. You can see, obviously, I think Laurent was earlier here. He talked, and with Mike, the Google and the smart contact lens with Alcon, a patent for a cyborg lens and an electronic intraocular lens, Apple, wearables for consumers to monitor their health, many partnerships that Apple has done with academic and clinical, IBM, Watson Health, partnership with Bausch & Lomb, Intel, applications to speed up some clinical diagnosis, Microsoft, joining forces with Johns Hopkins, ability to create biological cells. So a new group that's kind of entered into our marketplace. So really what I want to challenge this panel about today is really how the innovation landscape has changed in many ways. Technology, that's what we all love about here, but we've also seen some new players coming about. So I thank my panelists. I would like to ask one question to the audience, please. I'm not as sophisticated. I don't know how to help tweet or any of that, but what would you say is the most interesting thing about this slide? Well, that would be Bill Link wearing a tie. So I think that right there is probably the most interesting thing on this slide that I've seen, really. I mean, I don't know where that came from, Bill. Maybe your college reunion or something of that nature. So Flemming, nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Great to see you. Your organization has strong legacy in rare disease entities, is now making a strong move into ophthalmology. Congratulations. How does your organization approach ophthalmology now for a disease like dry eye, which has a wide prevalence?
Yeah, I think we set out in 2013 that ophthalmology would be an area of high interest to us. We took the same approach which we've taken to the other 6 or 7 areas that we're in, which is an old-fashioned approach, which is to believe in innovation. Maybe it's my heritage as a physician, but I started gathering a number of people that I really believed in, that had significant ophthalmic experience. We got a lot of expert opinion from practicing and scientific-minded experts in the ophthalmic area, and we honed in on some areas like front of the eye that we thought still had opportunities for innovation. We scouted for certain assets. We made a deal, which at that time was highly criticized by many, including our investors, which was to acquire a company called Sarco Biosciences that had a compound for dry eye. And the next following years, we were exposed to a lot of criticism, but the team stuck with it, developed a program, overcame a lot of obstacles. And I think there was 2 or 3 learnings for me for that. One is if you want to go into an area, you need to stay committed. Number 2 is you cannot just go in with one compound. So we very quickly got access to 2 or 3 other compounds, some of them in the same front of the eye area. And thirdly, I think it's very important that you look at the compound as harsh as you look at the other compounds that's in your pipeline. Does this have true potential? Is it differentiated? Is it first, best, or new to class? And you put out some pretty ambitious goals for the team in terms of the clinical trials, the regulatory path. You think globally, and you try to develop a program that really shows that the product is differentiated. My learning, I've had the opportunity to work on Lucentis, Eylea, and other great ophthalmic products, is that it's better to really focus all the efforts on something that is truly differentiated than me-toos or less differentiated. So there was actually no magic to it. It was pretty old-fashioned, focus on innovation, build a team of experts, stay with it during tough times, and try to develop the best possible profile for the compound in consultation and collaboration with a number of experts. So I don't think there's much magic to it.
Bill Meury, you were up here a little earlier with Gavin and David, and Bill, you did a nice job on that. Thank you for that. You've increased your focus on devices, dry eye, glaucoma, but most recently, you brought the gene therapy startup RetroSense Therapeutics to treat retinitis pigmentosa. Are you shifting your focus to more promising therapeutic options than devices?
I wouldn't describe it necessarily as a shift, but certainly an expansion of our focus, and that's in each of the 3 areas that we cover. And listen, it's largely a function of innovation. You know, when you rely on small companies around the world for new products, it's a real luxury to decide what you want and what you don't want. Strategically, it was a fit because we're in retina. And we'll look at other rare conditions in eye care if it is in at least one of the 3 therapeutic areas that we cover. You know, we have to acquire the capabilities. There's a lot of talent in the companies that we combine with, and we generally preserve that if we can. And as long as the customer base is not too dramatically different, then we don't mind a broad and more importantly, a diverse product line. So I would think about it as a expansion, but not a shift.
Mike, how does partnering with companies outside of the ophthalmic or medical device field, or are you seeing that you're going to spend more time, or is it just a timing issue of where you're partnering?
Am I allowed to start with something that has nothing to do with that question?
Well, again, let's go
Yes,
over the rules.
yes, you
I
are.
ask the
Yes,
question,
you are.
you answer, and you try to stick to the question. So, okay, so Ludwin, your question would be...
So thank you for the green light there. So I just wanted to offer my congratulations to Gavin Herbert and David Pyatt, who are honored here earlier today. They are really pioneers in the industry. Now, they're probably not used to getting compliments from Alcon people, and I see David looking very uncomfortable back there surrounded by Alcon people. But nonetheless, I wanted to make sure that I had an opportunity to congratulate them in front of the audience for simply an outstanding job over the years, and I had the privilege of working with both of them over those years. So thank you, David and Gavin. With respect to inside or outside the industry, so I think my view is we got to work with both. It doesn't matter. You know, innovation is created in many different places, and I do think that companies from outside the industry working with companies inside the industry can create real magic. And as I look at the partnership we have with Google, I mean, what they are coming up with in terms of developing and accommodating IOL with us is truly amazing. So the miniaturization aspects, I'm sure Laurent covered some of these things, but the way they think about how to get around problems and then coming back to us to discuss how practically these things work, and using some of our advisors in terms of moving this project forward is truly revolutionary. On the other hand, we just launched a revolutionary new device, a 3D imaging product. And that product is from a company that's inside the medical device area, but not really from ophthalmology, but it had application to the vit-ret area. So I think when one is a leader in the industry, you can't just look inside, you can't just look outside, you have to look at what are the possibilities out there that meet the patient's needs, that perhaps meet the customer's needs, and provide value mostly to the patient.
So Ludwin, let's build a little on that one. Think about those companies we just talked about, the Googles of the world, who are really experts in consumer innovation. Where do these companies fit in clinical healthcare?
Yeah, indeed, I believe that this consumer element is what they bring to the table, and that adds a new perspective to healthcare, because they are used to working with consumers, which are patients. We would call them patients, and just think of the impact of the heart rate meters the iWatch can do, the Apple Watch can do, or the fitness trackers, right? That creates a closeness of these companies, Apple, Google, to the consumers. And I believe that's very important because it creates a consciousness about health, awareness, and that creates market growth. Actually, we did a study which showed that the information of patients about diseases, about treatment options, is one of the major growth factors. So I believe that what we see there, that they come from the consumer end, actually has some big impact on healthcare. The other area I believe these companies are good at is at connecting people, consumers with companies, patients with healthcare professionals. So I would expect telemedicine to really grow and come up, maybe also in ophthalmology to some extent. And finally, and that's the other interesting thing, and Mike was talking about his company's collaboration with Google. I mean, that's definitely not the core competency of Google. Nevertheless, they have so large funds. They actually invest 1/3 of their Google venture funds into healthcare. So this is huge. So they build also competencies in areas which are not their core competencies. So I really believe that these companies will also come into healthcare from a different angle and bring new things to the table.
Ashley, last year you said you were agnostic to internal or external innovation. In fact, I think you even said that a little on the panel today. But at the end of the day, you have to make a decision as the leader, and now obviously even getting more involved in ophthalmology. How do you make that decision between saying I'm going to go external or I'm going to go internal on bringing innovation forward?
You know, a couple things I guess I would offer. I want to build on one discussion that everybody's been talking about, is really around the marriage of some competencies that don't exist within our own, four walls of a company. And I think that we've gotten much better in ophthalmology, in the world of diabetes, another world I live in, of going to find where those capabilities are, whether that be small molecule, big molecule, hardware, software, and again, I keep coming back to that slide about Google and IBM, and I think we know a little bit about healthcare, but what's really nice about some of those partners is their analytical prowess, is their capital deployment model, and I think that probably most of us are skilling up a little bit in that area, and I can tell you J&J is actively involved in a lot of those spaces. I'd say a couple things. One is we've learned you got to go get really good experts inside the company to go identify what's outstanding outside of the company. And where we lost our way is when some of the pendulum swung too far. And I've got several examples, whether that be in our surgical device area where we're learning new spaces, whether it be in ENT or whether that be in diabetes where we're learning about smart sensors. The first thing we had to go do is go get that resident knowledge inside the company. And once you do that, they know what good looks like. So they can go do we call them the bullseye charts that we all have around what stage of development they're at, and they're pretty good at knowing what horses are going to get to the end race. So it's given us all a little bit of a better batting average, I would say. But it is that reciprocity of understanding what good looks like from the outside in and the inside out, and constantly shopping and putting yourself out there, and asking for help a little bit along the way.
Bill, you've never been a traditionalist. That's the reason you've been so successful. But now we've got new partners that are not traditional in any way. Do you see small companies starting to reach out to the IBMs and the Googles of the world and saying, hey, how about my technology?
Absolutely. I think, there's no question that in healthcare advancements, especially in the medical device side and in drug delivery, we never develop the technology in this industry sector. We redeploy technologies that are being developed for, amazing manufacturing applications or wafer crafting and so forth. And so, whether it's a laser, a drug delivery, a plastic, almost always we just try to figure out what the problem is, no kidding, and say, well, now what are the choices? The way we have been tackling it isn't working very well. So is there a better way? And almost always the better way, the technology side of the better way, and maybe the thinking side of the better way, comes from outside of healthcare. So that's very routine for us. I think on the pharma and biological side, it's the research labs. Very, very seldom are those research labs the ones in the companies. Sometimes, but they're the ones that perfect and provide regimentation and discipline around processes and so forth. Often the original work is at the universities or at the research institute, something like that.
So this is now we tag team. Bill, Meury, Mike, Ludwin. We do hear this, large companies can struggle with internal innovation and we're not proud and we'll go externally. That's great. And you guys have all, actually, every panelist here, ladies and gentlemen, have done that. But I guess the question that I have is, and Ashley started to attack it, but what decisions drive you to say, I'm going for that small startup or I'm going to internalize it? I think Ashley started to capture it, but there's got to be a mentality in your company or when you make that decision to do that. So Bill, Mike, and Ludwin, what is that? What is that trigger?
My sense is the only mentality that makes sense is the best idea has to win. I think people spend a lot of time waste a lot of time trying to figure out what the right percentage of internal and external is. That's not to say if you have a very large internal R&D organization that's investing a great deal of money that you don't look at the productivity of that group. That's, of course, important, but at least at Allergan, we have a slightly different model. We don't invest quite at the same level as other companies. In fact, I think 70% of our compounds were sourced externally. But any type of a target, you said it earlier, creates perverse incentive. If there's a cap, people spend to the cap, or they don't go over the cap, and they're either wasting money or missing opportunities. And if there's some magical split, which I think is an unsolvable calculation, again, it may create perverse behavior, and I think you just have to make sure your R&D organization, to the extent you have an internal one, is productive, and then make sure the best idea wins.
Mike?
Yeah, we use something similar. I think at the end of the day, you're just looking for what is the best idea out there that fits with your product portfolio and your strategic direction. And really, it doesn't matter where it comes from. Although I will tell you, I feel an obligation to the folks out there who are creating the new things outside the companies to give them a fair hearing, to make sure we hear about everything that's out there, and make sure that we bring some of it in, because I think it is critical to the industry that there is a vibrant group of people out there outside the big companies doing those types of things, and then they can count on some of the big companies then to bring those inventions in-house. That, to me, is one of the biggest things we can do for the group.
Ludwin?
Yeah, I believe companies can only be successful in the market when they differentiate from their competitors. So there must be something they are particularly good at, And if that's, let's say, a certain technology or a certain area in R&D, and that's definitely the case with my company, Zeiss, then it's a good idea to have that competency internally, right, and not depend on external companies. So if there's a company out there which does something that's really unique and great and perfectly fits what I want to do in my company, then of course that's a acquisition candidate. If there's something I say, well, that makes sense to have that, but I don't want to do it in-house, why not? Of course. I mean, here I see the same like the others before me. If there's a good idea out there, I mean, we would be stupid not to look at it. So it's the mix and it's the strategy which is behind that. And in the end, I would also add to it, there are other factors which drive these decisions, like time to market, risk, right? Because when I do a development on my own, there's a risk that it fails, right? In the beginning, I don't know, but I have to pay all the way, right? And then it turns out later whether it's successful or not. If I acquire technology, then it's later stage, it might be more expensive, but at least I know, at least with a little bit more certainty, whether it will be successful or not. So it's other factors as well.
So Flemming and Bill Meury, increased interest in new treatment technologies such as biosimilars and gene therapy. How is this affecting the approach to drug development and innovation in ophthalmology?
Yeah, I think, I don't think my organization does either. I don't really think in technologies in that sense. I think you talked a lot about these companies, Google, Apple, Amazon, and I've also with my team visited them. I think there's 2 or 3 things we just have to keep in mind and also be careful we don't fall into the same mousetrap as people interested in the ophthalmic area. They all disrupted the industries they came into. So they were never, there were a lot of players before them where people said, wow, I'm the leader, and today they're no longer the leader. So they show a lot about disruption, and if you ask yourself, how did they achieve that disruption? In most cases, it is the way they work, it's the products they bring to market, or the solutions they bring to market, and it's the connectivity with the customers, the end user. And I think that's what you can learn a lot from. Which technology and where you are in a life cycle on technology, I think is less important. I don't go to my team and say, I want to be in gene therapy. Oh, I need a biosimilar. I think that's just the wrong problem. When I go into my team and say, what are the unmet need in front of the eye? Is it a conjunctivitis product? Is it another dry eye product? Are there any opportunities in back of the eye? Do we know some new mechanism of action? Can we cross-fertilize from some of the other disease areas we work in? And the lesson I think that my team have learned from all of these technology companies is we work also in the area of rare diseases. There's an incredible intimacy between the treatment, the provider, and the patient. And I think one of the things that I've said to my team, why can't we bring some of that to the ophthalmic area and not look at people as populations or groups or subgroups, but look at each patient as a unique individual? Because I think a lot of this technology that is coming and a lot of the solutions that these technology companies are bringing are customization and individualization. And I think that's where they probably can bring the most. The final thing we should not forget is, I worked in big companies. I think the biggest obstacle to innovation is not whether you have the money or whether you have all the smartest people in the room. That's the larger you get, the bigger structure it gets. It takes 5 teams, 5 team meetings to get to any committee, to get any decision. Everybody's risk averse. So one of the things I did when we moved into Ophthalmic is I said, you have free access to me 24/7. This product is so important. It is so key for me. You can bypass any committee. You can come to me. So I think what we can learn is not a technology learning. It's a mindset. It's an approach. And it's to be disruptive. Because if we don't turn out disruptive ourselves, someone will be disruptive to us pretty soon.
Bill?
I think that, first of all, you can't be religious when it comes to anything related to R&D. That's for certain. I think you have to have a commitment to a space and be open-minded. And I agree with Mike. There's a lot of great companies around the world doing great work. And we look at virtually everything. As it relates to technology, I think it's going to enable better diagnosis and better interventions in eye care. You know, I think about diabetes and respiratory and cardiovascular. As innovative as eye care is, I believe there are some technologies being used in those conditions that eventually could be used in ophthalmology. I think about implants and MIGs and rings and other types of devices that can monitor IOP levels and help instruct better intervention for the right patient at the right time. And that's the future. It's still very exploratory, but if you look across the entire healthcare sector, my sense is it's on its way.
Mike and Ashley, so let me bring a little reality here. Now, this is all good in front of the group, but now you're sitting in your boardrooms and you have your head of R&D there. And he or she has a expenditure and they have projects, but you've sat there and you said, I'm agnostic to where it comes, but this person is sitting there going, but Mike, Ashley, I'm spending money on this project. How do you handle that internal force where they might not be agnostic because their life and job depends on their productivity? Mike and then Ashley.
I'd say spend less and get that product.
That's very nice, Mike. Thank you very much for that insightful comment there.
But in an empathetic way.
Yeah, I know you. You're a lover, Mike. I know you. You'd give him a big hug.
So you know, I think at the end of the day, the entire company is bought into that philosophy. You know, it isn't one project at a time. It's the company's bought into the philosophy, and the management team makes the determination, not just the head of R&D, but the management team makes the determination as to what makes the most sense for the company. So there's weighting there from both BD, R&D, commercial side, ops. So we work as a management team. We have a philosophy, and I think everybody believes in it. Everybody believes in what's best for the company, and the patient is the way we should go.
Ashley?
Yeah, I think it's also just a reflection of where the market is going. I mean, if we're just a material science only company, I've got some folks who do that, for the past 100 years. But when we look at the future, and I think you're hearing a lot about it, you're starting to see more of an emergence of some capabilities that, quite frankly, we are not self-embedded. And those are things like smart devices and connectivity and really miniature diagnostic navigation equipment. Those are not our core competencies. So those are easier ones. I would also just say incentives. I mean, and we have many R&D leaders here from J&J and AMO and all in the industries. I think that there's a new generation R&D leader that is really better at a technology scout. And I'll come back to a comment that you made earlier around, I think we're moving more and more into less conventional outside in, inside in partnerships. And I think that we're much more codependent. And very rarely are we taking a classical off-the-shelf technology and just going to commercializable, scale. And I'm engaged, and my team, a lot more in conversations around they need access, a startup might need access to injection molding. Well, let's go to the best injection molding company in the world. Or they might need advice in the clinical. So there's a lot more collaborative development along the way.
Okay, Ludwin, Bill, and Flemming. The ability to gather more and more patient data is increasing. We're hearing that. In fact, if you saw some of the discussion today, that was a real key point. With diagnostic systems, surgical systems, patient wearables, the whole gambit, helping clinicians manage large volume of data, how clinically important is that to you as you're looking at the company, and how do you manage big data? So Ludwin, let's go with you first, and then I'll go to you, Bill, and then Flemming.
Yeah, I see two levels actually. One level is to bring together all the data of one individual patient, right? And present it in a meaningful way, use all that pieces of data to make a meaningful diagnosis and treatment decision. That's actually what Zeiss is doing with a product called Forum, which manages the data, which brings together the data, organizes data. I mean, it's still not standard everywhere to have all patient data readily available, combine the data, and make good analysis of the data. So that's the first step, and that's probably state of the art today. Further in the future, I see what we call, and you mentioned it before, Jim, big data, right? So this would be the next level, to not only look at all data of one individual, but all data of all patients. Because then we can use things like machine learning. We can develop insights and understand more about the patterns of diseases, so to speak, which will presumably lead to earlier diagnosis and earlier treatments of diseases. So that would be the next level, and that would require new skills which companies like Google and IBM are working on. So I believe that that's actually something which is probably coming in the, well, relatively near future.
Bill, Link, big data for small companies, where does it fit?
It doesn't.
You and Mike really got to separate, because I'm telling you, I'm getting concerned about the length of the answers.
I love the concept of big data, and how does it power a process, and how does it inform us and help us deliver better, more efficient therapy, et cetera. I'm a little confused about where that really fits in the innovation cycle a bit, whether we can do that on the outside, or it really needs, the substance and presence and footprint of a larger organization. My leaning is that, it needs to be scalable and so forth. Some of the innovation, of course, can happen out, among a small team, but the scaling of it has to go pretty early into a well-resourced organization, something like that.
Flemming?
Yeah, I think any company, including ours, of course, it's a topic you have to deal with. I think, for me, it's again, where do we go from the very general statement to the very specific statements? So we've had some discussions with one of these technology companies, because we're moving into an area that also affects ophthalmology, which has a developmental aspect in it. So there was potentially an opportunity to collaborate on collection of a large set of data in newborns and young children, and basically in a better way analyze and synthesize these data using some logarithm that particular company had. So I think in understanding the natural history of disease, I think these companies, particularly with their ability to handle gigantic databases in a very smart way and extract variables of importance for outcome, I think that's where they can bring a lot, and where I see there's potentially great opportunities for collaboration. The other thing that I think we will have to deal with as an industry, it may not affect the ophthalmic area so much yet, but what I see in the rare disease and in cancer and in other areas we are in, is the payers are increasingly saying, yes, it's very good you got approval now, but now I want you to follow the patients for 5 years and check in regularly with me whether what you saw in the clinical trial is actually what you see in real life. So whether we like it or not, I think big data and analysis of big data will become part of a competency that we either have to have ourselves or work with someone to have.
Mike, Bill, Meury, and Ashley. Mike and Bill and Ashley, you work for Google, Amazon, or one of the other companies, Microsoft, and you're in the boardroom discussing, and you just sat in an OIS. Why would you enter this space? Mike?
I think you'd first of all say that Alcon's a really good company. And then after a pause and a little more reflection.
I can't even go there, to be honest with you here.
And then after a pause and a little more reflection, I think you'd say this ophthalmic space is incredibly interesting. There's an aging population here. There's still great needs here. Our technology could marry up with one of these companies in a very big way. And we have the financial resources and complementary technology to these companies that, again, getting together could bring magic.
Bill?
Yeah, I would say the same. If I was Apple and looking at a specialty, psychiatry, neurology, gastroenterology, infectious disease, women's health, you name it, I don't think there's any one specialty better than eye care in terms of understanding, appreciating, and accepting innovation. And that's what those companies, and I do believe that ultimately improving healthcare outcomes and controlling costs are the two main goals in healthcare right now. And I think this space is a target-rich environment for a company like an Apple or Google that wants to make an investment in healthcare.
Ashley?
Yeah, I mean, I think what they've, quite frankly, they've disrupted some of us in just their consumer connectivity, and you know, that's really their sweet spot. And so I think that they look at that and say, you know, consumers are going to be woefully much more engaged in their healthcare. They're going to be much more engaged in their eyes, just like they've gotten to be in dental and aesthetics and skin. And so it's a really ripe space where their wheelhouse can add a lot of value to some of the traditional players in ophthalmology.
So Flemming and Ludwin, can they really impact drug discovery? And Ludwin, can they really impact diagnostic evaluations? Let's go with you, Flemming.
Yeah, I think right now a lot of the devices that they're working on, and I'm sure a lot of you have been exposed to them, you know, Apple and others are working on devices where they use the phone to do diagnostic tests, looks at the eye and various things. I think we all feel at this stage they're pretty rudimentary, but I think that's almost like a beta type. That will come over time. And I think totally, as was said, the consumer connectivity, and you know, they are used to putting out beta versions, then you know, they are not used to having 10 years of development. They quickly put out, get consumer feedback, and then they improve the version. They have actually the customers involved in improving the next version. I think you're going to see that in the diagnostic area for some areas that would be relevant in this situation. I think the area where I think they're going to be a little bit struggling more is in the regulatory and the clinical trials area. I think what I've seen is a bit of naivety about what is required. I think that's a core competency of our industry. There's high regulatory barriers to entry, and you know, data have to be collected in a very thorough, statistical correct manner with all kind of quality controls. That's probably not their sweet spot. So in the diagnostic area, yes, consumer connectivity, yes. In clinical trials, controlled clinical trials, not yet.
Ludwin?
Yeah, same, along the same lines. I believe, first of all, they need data, right? That data needs to be generated, and that actually being done with diagnostic devices. So, for example, if we think about screening, right, which they could do because all they do is connect people with, well, computers or companies, healthcare professions, whatever. So that has an impact on diagnostics, because on diagnostic devices, because then we need diagnostic devices that allow for such screening, for example. So I believe there will be a link here, but I would definitely agree. I mean, there are limitations to what they can do.
So Mike, Bill, and Bill, last question. I talked about the Googles of the world, but what other forces did we not discuss that are impacting innovation today? Mike?
I think the rise of the consumer and their willingness to pay for technology that won't be paid for by the payers. So as much as the payers are a critical component, I think the consumer demand is going beyond the just good enough, which typically is what payers will pay for. So if you look at the area of presbyopia, for example, you can get a monofocal IOL or you can get a multifocal IOL, and people will pay for the difference. Now, interestingly, what our research has shown is people will pay much more and much more often than physicians believe they will for toric or multifocal IOLs. So the consumer is interested in keeping their health and vigor and a number of other things for a long period of time now, well to 100 years, right? And so they're willing to pay for it. And it's a small price to pay when you consider going through a cataract procedure and you're going to be looking through those eyes for the next 30, 40 years.
Bill?
Yeah, you know, one thing I think about is the need. No kidding, this wave of aging is so real. And our expectation of being well and doing well late in life is beautiful, okay, in every way, and it increases demand, increases willingness to engage. If I can fix it, I'm going to get it fixed. A couple decades ago, that was not in the mindset. So I think this aging wave and the attitudes of many of our communities is really helping us foster and reward innovation.
Wrap it up, Bill Meury.
Yeah, I think that if you look at an innovative technology, you usually look at it through several filters: consumer, the unmet need, population. You have to look at it through the payer too. We didn't talk about that. That is definitely changing what you pursue and what you don't, and also the practice economics of eye care professionals. Certainly changing the type of technologies we look at all the time. The patient is first, but that's certainly a part of it too.
So again, great group. Let's give them a big round of applause. Thanks, group. Well done.